In November 1983, the Soviet Union prepared for nuclear war. Not because missiles had been launched, not because cities had been bombed, but because NATO was conducting a military exercise. An exercise so realistic. The Kremlin believed it might be the real thing. Across Europe, Western forces simulated the transition from conventional war to full nuclear deployment. Secure communications were activated. Command codes were transmitted. Strategic bombers rehearsed launch procedures. On paper, it was routine. In Moscow, it looked like the beginning of World War III. The year was already dangerous. Just weeks earlier, the Soviet Union had shot down a civilian airliner. The United States had escalated rhetoric. Nuclear tensions were rising fast. And then came Able Archer 83, a NATO command exercise designed to test readiness, but executed with a level of realism that alarmed Soviet intelligence. The problem was simple and terrifying. The Soviets had been expecting a first strike. For years, Soviet leadership believed the United States might launch a surprise nuclear attack under the cover of a military drill. Able Archer looked exactly like that scenario. Western commanders practiced moving from DEFCON procedures to simulated nuclear release authorization. Messages were encrypted. Command chains were activated. War plans were rehearsed. To NATO, it was preparation. To the Soviet Union, it was the opening move. Inside the Kremlin, analysts began asking a terrifying question. Was this really an exercise? Or was it the moment they had been warned about? Soviet forces in Eastern Europe were quietly placed on heightened alert. Nuclear-capable aircraft were prepared. Strategic units were repositioned. The Cold War had entered one of its most dangerous misunderstandings. Two nuclear superpowers, one conducting a drill, the other preparing for war. The officer on duty that night was not a politician, not a high-ranking general, not a man trained to command armies. He was a systems analyst. His job was to monitor the Soviet Union's early warning satellite network, a system designed to detect an American nuclear first strike within seconds of launch. The technology was new, recently deployed, considered advanced, but not infallible. The Cold War had entered a phase of technological escalation. Both superpowers had invested billions into faster detection systems, automated retaliation protocols, and streamlined chains of command. The logic was simple and terrifying. Whoever responded first might survive. And survival depended on speed. That speed came at a cost. Inside the Serpukhov 15 bunker just outside Moscow, the atmosphere changed instantly when the alarm sounded. The word launch flashed across the screen in red. Then the confirmation code followed. The system classified the threat with the highest level of certainty. Confidence level, high. 5 missiles. Trajectory, United States to Soviet territory. Impact time, minutes. Protocol demanded immediate reporting up the chain of command. From there, the information would reach the Soviet leadership. A retaliatory strike could be launched before the American missiles even hit their targets. This was not theory. This was the doctrine of nuclear war. If the alert was real and the Soviets hesitated, their command centers, missile silos, and air bases could be destroyed in the first wave. Waiting could mean annihilation without response. But if the alert was false and they retaliated anyway, the consequences would be irreversible. The early warning satellites worked by detecting infrared heat signatures from missile launches. In theory, the system could identify the plume of a rocket rising from American soil. In theory, it was precise, but it was also new, unproven under real-world pressure. The officer on duty understood this. He had helped design parts of the system. He knew its strengths. He also knew its weaknesses. The data showed 5 launches, not 50, not hundreds. 5. That detail mattered. A real American first strike, according to Soviet military doctrine, would be massive, overwhelming, designed to eliminate retaliation capacity completely. A limited launch made little strategic sense. But the screen did not allow doubt. The alarms continued. The other officers in the room waited for his assessment. Sweat formed under uniforms. No one wanted to be the one responsible for hesitation. The chain of command was rigid. There was no room for improvisation. The system was designed to remove human emotion from the equation. Machines calculated. Humans confirmed. The officer had minutes to interpret what the machines were telling him. He requested confirmation from ground radar stations. No confirmation yet. That was not unusual. Ground radar would only detect incoming missiles once they crossed the horizon. Satellite detection came first. The delay increased tension. The computer system updated again. Still classified as a real attack. Still marked as incoming. Time was disappearing. Imagine the psychological weight of that moment. Every lesson drilled into him during training said the system existed for exactly this scenario. Trust the technology. Trust the protocol. Trust the design. But trust also meant unleashing nuclear retaliation against the United States. Against cities. Against millions of civilians. The Cold War had normalized the unthinkable. Both sides had thousands of nuclear warheads aimed at each other's population centers. New York, Washington, Los Angeles, Moscow, Leningrad. Entire civilizations reduced to targets on a screen. And now the screen was flashing. The officer had to make a judgment call. Not an emotional one. A rational one. He began analyzing probabilities. Why only 5 missiles? Why at that moment? Why would the United States initiate global nuclear war with such a limited strike? Another update came in. The system now reported a 6 detection. Then revised. Back to 5. Uncertainty in the data. Tiny inconsistencies. In high-pressure environments, small anomalies become critical clues. He weighed the risks. If he reported it as confirmed, the machinery of retaliation would begin moving. High command would assume the worst. Soviet missiles would launch. There would be no recalling them. If he reported it as a false alarm and he was wrong, Soviet cities could burn without warning. He later described the silence in that bunker as suffocating. Everyone understood that history might be unfolding in real time. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction depended on rational actors making rational decisions. But it also depended on flawless detection systems. And no system is flawless. Outside the bunker, the world was asleep. Families in both countries had no idea that the survival of their cities might be hanging by a thread inside an underground command center. The countdown toward potential impact continued. Minutes stretched into eternity. Ground radar still showed nothing. No confirmed objects crossing into Soviet airspace. If missiles had truly been launched, radar contact should appear soon. The officer's heart was racing, but his report had to sound calm. He picked up the phone to inform his superiors. His words would determine the next step. He classified the alert as a system malfunction. Not confirmed. Not reliable. Not an active attack. It was a decision that went against procedure. A deviation from strict interpretation. A risk that could have ended his career or his country. After the alarms of September 1983 and the downing of Korean Airlines Flight 007, the Cold War atmosphere was already volatile. Trust between Washington and Moscow had collapsed to one of its lowest points since the Cuban Missile Crisis. President Ronald Reagan had publicly referred to the Soviet Union as an evil empire. The Soviets, in turn, believed the United States was actively preparing for a decapitating first strike, a surprise nuclear attack designed to eliminate Soviet leadership before retaliation could be organized. This was not paranoia in a vacuum. Soviet intelligence had launched a secret operation known as Ryan, short for nuclear missile attack. Its purpose was simple: detect early signs of a U.S. first strike before it happened. Agents across Europe were instructed to monitor unusual military activity, sudden blood bank mobilizations, changes in government communication patterns, anything that might indicate preparations for nuclear war. The Kremlin believed the United States might hide an actual attack within a military exercise. And in November 1983, NATO gave them exactly what they feared. The exercise was called Able Archer 83. Officially, it was a routine annual command post exercise designed to simulate NATO procedures for escalating a conventional conflict into nuclear war. These drills had been conducted before, but this one was different. For the first time, The simulation incorporated new nuclear release procedures, new coded communications, new levels of realism. High-ranking political leaders were involved in the scenario. Secure channels were activated. Mock nuclear authorization messages were transmitted. From the outside, it looked like preparation for actual launch. From Moscow's perspective, it matched the exact pattern they had been trained to detect. Soviet intelligence officers began reporting unusual NATO activity. Encrypted communications traffic increased. Military units rehearsed transitions to wartime footing. Strategic bombers in Europe participated in simulated nuclear strike coordination. The pieces aligned too neatly. Inside the Soviet leadership, fear began to override skepticism. General Secretary Yuri Andropov was already in poor health and deeply suspicious of American intentions. A former head of the KGB, he had spent years studying Western strategy. He believed Washington might strike first if it sensed Soviet weakness. To Andropov, Able Archer did not look like theater. It looked like cover. Soviet military districts in Eastern Europe were placed on heightened alert. Nuclear-capable aircraft were readied. Missile units quietly increased readiness levels. Some reports later suggested that Soviet forces in East Germany and Poland were placed on standby to respond immediately if confirmation of an attack came. What made the situation especially dangerous was timing. Just weeks earlier, the Soviets had shot down a Korean civilian airliner after mistaking it for a spy plane. International outrage was severe. U.S. Soviet relations deteriorated further. Each side believed the other was becoming more aggressive. Each side feared miscalculation. And now, one side believed war might already be underway. The structure of nuclear deterrence depends on clarity. If one side misreads the other's actions, deterrence becomes instability. Able Archer 83 created exactly that instability. NATO commanders believed they were running a defensive rehearsal. The Soviets believed they might be witnessing the first phase of a real attack. Intelligence reports reaching Moscow grew increasingly urgent. Some Soviet sources later revealed that leadership genuinely feared a surprise strike. The scenario NATO was simulating, escalating from conventional war to nuclear release, was precisely the scenario Soviet intelligence had been told to watch for. After Able Archer 83, U.S. leadership realized how dangerously close misinterpretation alone could bring the world to nuclear war. The crisis did not emerge from aggression or ideology, but from fear and the misreading of signals. Nuclear deterrence assumes rational actors with shared understanding. Yet in 1983, that shared understanding did not exist. The world was not saved by heroism, but by ambiguity that did not escalate further. No missiles were launched. No cities were destroyed. Yet the danger was real. The lesson remains urgent today. Nuclear weapons still exist. More nations possess them. Systems are faster, more automated, and increasingly dependent on technology and artificial intelligence. Decisions that once took days can now unfold in minutes. Able Archer 83 reminds us that the greatest nuclear threat may not come from intentional war, but from fear, suspicion, and miscalculation. Peace often survives not because systems are perfect, but because one final mistake does not happen. And that fragile margin still exists today.